Hello, and welcome to episode 42 of Trek Prime. And we're doing a little switch from what I planned to do. I had a subject in mind, but, it wasn't quite enough for a whole podcast, and we're going to integrate it into another one when my next turn comes up. But I decided, just after seeing a number of YouTube videos and reading a number of blogs and talking to Jeff in many of our after shows about the same subject matter, and among the writers of Star Trek over the years, there's been this idea that Gene Roddenberry wanted no conflict among the main human characters on the show when he was alive. Now, I've never been in a room with this guy. Obviously, I didn't know him. But I find it, knowing what I know about Gene Roddenberry, that he would ever make such an exacting statement. And the reason, so I don't know that for sure, but I do know that when it comes to conflict in Star Trek, I don't think it's so much the lack of it, but the difference in how it was handled. So what we're doing today is we're going to talk about over 26 episodes of TOS and TNG, The Next Generation, that were made during Gene Roddenberry's lifetime. Doesn't mean he wrote them. While he was around with this idea of no conflict, that actually had a measure of human conflict in them. And we're going to, and I'm just going to rattle off the episode and elements of the plot, and Jeff and I will discuss them. And nope, there's not going to be any Voyager, DS9, Enterprise. This is all in Gene's lifetime. And I debated whether to include the movies or not, but I could include the TV shows. So, because, canon, yeah, I have to mention that. So, I know movies are canon, but, we agreed, and I'm still on that canon thing. So, anyway. So, the first episode we're going to talk about, and it surprised me that I could actually pinpoint this sense of conflict back to the very first Star Trek pilot, The Cage, but I could. Okay? Because, first of all, just in the first 10 minutes of the show, Captain Pike is very obviously conflicted with himself and the crew. I mean, they're detecting this this signal and distress call from this ship that has been lost in the Talos Star group, and, he's kind of snarky with his new yeoman. And he's kind of making disparaging remarks toward number one, which are surprising her, but she's not really registering it, of course, because she's cerebral. And then he goes into his quarters and talks to Dr. Was it Boyce?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and he's talking about, I've had it. I'm tired of being responsible for all these lives. And the doctor is basically telling him, well, you set high standards. You should ever be like a human being except yourself. And, and he's kind of giving him the psychiatric treatment. And there's sort of a conflict there. He's telling him, you know what? You could either face your problems or you could just keel over and start dying. Now, is it me, or is there not somewhat of a conflicting conversation there?
Well, what you got is a man that's in conflict with himself, because he's like worn out and tired, and what he really needs is a vacation. But he's looking at it as like, I'm sick of this, and I just want to call it quits and go home and bury my head in the sand and just, and then the doctor's saying, well, look, human beings have to face challenges. And if you just live your life without challenges, you'll weaken and die. It's just, people never grow up if they don't.
So Pike is internally conflicted, and the doctor's explaining to him that he can't escape from his conflicts.
That's right.
So the episode internally is not anti-conflict.
No.
Because it's explaining how you have to overcome them. And we'll get into that a little bit later, because that's an important point. Now, when No Man Has Gone Before, that's James. Is that James T. Kirk's introduction or James R. Kirk? We have those double Kirks there because of the name.
Yeah, Kirk from another universe, maybe.
And sorry, James R. Kirk is still canon, and is still played by William Shatner, even though I suppose we could say that's a clone or something. I don't know. Whatever. They didn't.
Twin brother.
Yeah, they didn't take that out. Who happens to be a captain and everything, and no Spock. But it says on the bottom that they never itched that out with the remaster. They kept that James R. Kirk in. So, and they could have totally changed that. But I'm not going to get in that digression. But the whole thing about that is that his navigator and friend gets mutated, and basically starts seeing everybody, including him, as below him as a result. And Kirk is conflicted with Dr. Daner and Spock about essentially killing his best friend while he still can.
Yeah.
And so he has a conflict with himself, again, like Captain Pike did in the first pilot, but he also has a conflict with his best friend who has been mutated.
And that's the worst kind of conflict, when we have to consider a fatal decision to do
Right,
something.
exactly. And, it's wearing on Kirk because he has to bring this gigantic phaser rifle down there, and he's kind of trying to get Dr. Daner, like, can you convince him not to be this way because you were a psychiatrist? Because he really doesn't want to kill this guy.
Yeah.
He's like, I'd rather you, because you have his abilities now to kind of deal with him, but she's like kind of out of it, and she's like, oh, well, he's right because we're superior and all this stuff. But still, part of her kind of knows that he's right.
Yeah.
So, again, there's a whole lot of conflict happening there.
Yeah.
He's all sure that I'm the superior one. I'm so above you now. She kind of sees a little bit of that, but she also kind of has her foot in humanity a little bit.
Yeah.
And so he's having to tell her, yeah, well, you're still partly human, or you wouldn't be here talking to me, would you? And obviously you're trying to convince yourself of this. So there's the human conflict there of having to basically, for the good of the universe and for themselves, kind of putting somebody out of their misery, almost like a rabid animal.
And you see that conflict between him and Spock when they're in the briefing room, and Spock is trying to convince him to put aside his emotions and use logic to decide what he needs to do.
Right, and Kirk's having trouble with that.
Yeah, and Kirk can't do it. He's like, no, can't you think like a human for once? And he's just...
Right, he's telling him, oh, can you feel now that you made a heart?
Yeah.
So, I mean, no conflict there, I mean, that's...
yeah.
I mean, obviously, Spock's his friend, and he's like, I can't kill this guy any more than I can kill you, So, there's that conflict there, and that's the second pilot. Yep. Now, I'm going in production order here because that's just how I roll.
Yeah.
That's third episode produced. Corbomite maneuver. Lots of conflict in that one. Lots of it.
Yeah.
First of all, Kirk and Yeoman Rand. Okay, it's a minor conflict, but he's annoyed with her in that episode a bit.
Yeah.
She's obviously new to the ship, and she's bringing him all these salads that Bones is recommending. And if I remember, he was kind of snarky with Bones in that, too.
Yeah.
A little bit like, yeah, well, I know you're good and all that, but, stop mother henning me.
What was it? It started off with him being in sickbay doing this, what was it? He was trying to lose a couple of pounds or something.
Yeah, they had this thing where he was constantly doing these exercises in sickbay during the season. So.
And Bones is really getting on his case here about, keep going, and then the red alert sounds, and he don't even tell him that the red alert
that's how the first Federation ship approaches and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they bring in another character named Bailey, who is a mess of conflicting emotion.
Oh, God, yeah.
Because and he's a young guy who's thrust into this position way too early, and everything is annoying him. He's like, it's blocking the way. He's upset about everything.
Yeah, everything
is getting on his nerves, and he's ready to break down like most of the first beginning of the episode.
Oh, yeah. Panic.
And Bones is sitting there with Kirk saying that, you think you put him into the fire a little early?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, he's a good officer. I know he'll do it. And Kirk's kind of being a little arrogant about it, which is, how slick he could be.
Yeah.
But
Bones was trying to show you.
Bones is a doctor, and he's kind of a psychiatrist in that way, too. And because, they had no Troy or anything like that. So his whole thing was that, I can see he's kind of breaking. So they're dealing with this unknown threat, and, it's really bothering him. And then he totally just goes off on them and says, what do you want, wind up toy soldiers and all this stuff? And he just totally has a nervous breakdown on the bridge. And then, there's a scene where I remember Kirk is like, all right, Bones, I don't want to hear your opinions or your ideas. And they're actually fighting.
Yeah. The stress is just of the situation. The stress is just getting on their nerves to the worst way,
Right. And then, of course, they meet Clint Howard on it and have the Tranya at the end.
Orange juice.
Right? Or the little Tang or whatever they're drinking. First, the Tranya, not Tang, Tranya. So, like, start drinking there. Anyway, so no, but in the middle of it, they're all kind of stressed out until, Spock is basically thinking checkmate.
Yeah.
But Kirk is like, no, poker. And he bluffs him. And we'll hear Corbomite later on in TOS. I forget the episode, but he mentioned Corbomite again in some episode as a bluff. But he kind of used that Corbomite thing a lot. Yeah, but anyway, so so there was a lot of tension in that episode. I know it was like the first production order when they did. Or made. It wasn't aired first, but it was the first production order when they did. But again, the crew are kind of tense with each other and awkward. And there's a lot of new people on the ship, like Rand and Bailey, and Bailey just leaves because he's like, obviously I can't hack the position in Starfleet. Maybe I can be a bridge to the First Federation and be less wound up.
Yeah.
So again, you see what I'm getting at, the conflict.
Yep. And like you said, there was a lot in that episode. A lot.
So, okay. So the next one, well, okay, this is technically goes with the cage a little bit, but the menagerie. And let me go here. Now, we know Spock as being one of these guys who's very correct and does everything right. In the beginning of this, we established that he is totally willing, even at Pike's chagrin, to betray his crew, his uniform, to get Captain Pike back to Talos 4. And we know why in the end.
Yeah.
You know, because he's been injured in this accident and everything. But there's conflict between Kirk and Spock, Spock being stubborn and insisting that they do what they're supposed to do, and Kirk trying to give him all this leeway, and this albeit fake Admiral Mendez trying to enact law.
Yeah.
So the whole episode is this awkward conflict about going to this planet which is like a death penalty, the only death penalty left in the books.
Yeah.
So I guess it's that General Order 4 they talk about a little bit later.
General Order 1 or, something like that, I guess. I don't know.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So there's conflict with Spock, which you don't often see. I mean, you see conflict within Spock, but you don't usually see the crew in conflict with him because he won't answer questions. He's being evasive the whole time. He's betraying them. So there's a lot of conflict there. But in the end, there's a justified reason, and and it was all kind of contrived, but still, you know, Spock knows that he has to do something that he's not prepared to do.
Yeah.
You know,
so it was like maybe the first time he actually kind of went with his human side a little bit.
Right, because a lot of it was kind of like emotionally based. Like he felt that, you know, Pike needed this, rather than the logical thing to do would be to just let Pike vegetate. Yeah. And just slowly wither away, rather than, you know, give him at least the illusion of life. Yeah. On Talos 4. So I found it interesting that, you know, they built up not conflict within Spock so much, but the fact that he touched on his human side a little bit, and it affected people around him and made them wonder what kind of character he really truly had. Yeah. And how that worked. Okay, so the next up, it's kind of another courtroom thing. It involves Kirk, and that's court-martial. Yeah. Okay, he is accused of jettisoning an escape pod and killing somebody, presumably. And all these people at Starfleet who are friends of this Ben Finney guy, all of a sudden they're icing Kirk right out. Yeah. And all of a sudden Kirk goes from being this heroic character to this character who's hated, like out of the blue. Yeah. And even the guy's daughter is crying and all like, yeah, you killed him in the beginning. Yeah. And then Commodore Stone's like, yeah, we know what happened. And you face general court-martial now because I saw this and I saw this. So everybody all of a sudden is on his case. And even his ex-girlfriend is his prosecution. Yeah. So everybody's just coming to Kirk in this one. Yeah. You know,
he's like a man alone in that one.
And Spock has to be the voice of logic there because he realizes the computer made a mistake. And there's yet more conflict in the end when Ben Finney, who was, you know, I guess a dean at the academy when he was there, you know, who had worked under Kirk, was jealous and was trying to get back at Kirk for not, you know, rising up the way he wanted to in the ranks. Yeah. You know, on a starship. So I found...
He felt like Kirk held him down from some report that he submitted to his captain or something like that. He made a mistake. Finney made a mistake, something in it.
Right. So it was, again, there was all these different conflicting elements there. And then in the end, of course, well, you know, Kirk didn't do it, so all was kind of forgiven. And, of course, you know, Kirk's lawyer was defending Ben Finney now. So, you know, the Samuel, I'm into books, Cogley there.
Oh, yeah.
You know. But, you know, the solution to that was easy. Books! Yeah. That was the solution to that episode. Books! You know, that was his whole thing. So anyway, but so,
and, you know, that in itself kind of showed a sort of a conflict there where you have sort of humanity trying to balance itself between, you know, what's digitally printed before them
to
between the lines in history or something, you know.
And that was kind of carried over into Star Trek 2. I mentioned that movie, The Wrath of Khan, where, you know, Spock gives him Tale of Two Cities. Yeah. A written copy, not some digital thing.
Yeah, it's like, you know, he's trying to remind people, you know, just don't look at things on face value just by data. You got to read between the lines and look at the human element that's not put in the history books.
Right, and then, you know, and then, of course, Picard having books and stuff like that. So they kept that element in. Yeah. But, so, okay, there was that one. And I mentioned this one because, you know, on TOS you had that wonderful triad. Yeah. You know, of Bones, Spock, and Kirk. And a great example of that would be an episode called The Apple. Because they have this kind of prime directive situation of this pre-industrial culture that are kind of living their lives for this Vol creature. And of course, Bones, my friend Henrique actually had a good description for him. He called him a reactive liberal sort.
Yeah.
A person who had, a very humanistic attitude, but tended to want to react to things.
Yeah.
He would look at these people, these feeders of Vol, and say, "Oh, they're living life with somebody else. They're stagnating. We can't let this happen." And Spock would be sitting there saying that we may disapprove of it, but it's also logical and under Federation jurisdiction for them to be able to choose a life that seems to work for them. We can't interfere.
Yeah.
And of course, Kirk is like, well, we got to investigate further. He's that middle ground.
Yeah.
So you see the conflict between these three characters with three very different ideas having to resolve the situation, with all these differences. Plus the fact we lost a lot of red shirts in that one, so that obviously stressed Kirk out.
Yeah.
So I think we lost one, got struck by lightning, so I think a big red shirt episode that we ended up happening. So there was conflict right in the middle of that.
Yeah.
But with the three characters. Now that was often
Kirk was also feeling the guilt of having lost all those people while he was on that mission, and he was really, Spock and McCoy were trying to talk, don't beat yourself up over it, and it's like, and
that's another good point.
Yeah. And then when his ship was being pulled down from the atmosphere, he really, at that point, it's like, this was supposed to be just a typical mission. Now my whole crew is going to die, and, he's beat.
And wasn't that kind of a prelude to maybe a small shore leave or something?
Was it? I can't remember now.
Well, I remember that Chekhov was with that lady that he was with. They were kind of dating each other or whatever.
Yeah.
And, they found it kind of to be a paradise planet, but then when those things started killing him, Kirk felt that, maybe, like you said, there was some guilt there, and, Spock had to kind of put some logic into that, and, and everything. Yeah. So, again, there was a conflict that he had to deal with within himself, and they all had to kind of come in and sort that out. So, okay, the next one after that is more or less, I would say, again, a character more or less at odds with everybody else through a traumatic incident, and that was a Doomsday Machine. We had Matt Decker, who was obviously once a very highly decorated captain, who was deeply traumatized, and basically he wanted to take over the Enterprise and basically battery ram that planet killer.
Yeah, get vengeance for his crew that died. Yeah.
And basically Spock was trying to keep him under discipline, but he's like, I'm not having it. I'm in command of this ship, and I'm gonna do what I couldn't do with my constellation. So, and Kirk was kind of trapped over there and trying to deal with the situation on his end. And in the end, of course, he had to be kind of maverick and say, well, I'm gonna do it better than Matt did.
Yeah.
Because Matt just sent a shuttlecraft in there with himself.
And, at the same time, there was this conflict between Decker and Kirk because they were kind of friends. They knew each other, before he was captain of the Enterprise. Right. And, then he had to find himself putting himself against Decker to save his ship because Decker had just taken it from Spock, and, and Kirk was upset about it and saying, hey, you're just being a maverick with my ship, and you're gonna destroy everything. So there was a conflict
between Matt Decker and Kirk, and there was a conflict between Decker and Spock.
Yeah.
So you had that three-way conflict right there.
That's right.
So, so that was that situation. And, of course, in the end, that got dealt with, too. The next one is, and it seems this is kind of somewhat of a theme of TOS. The starship captain goes rogue.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, TOS, yeah.
They didn't do it a lot, but it was kind of a trope they use sometimes. The Omega Glory.
Yeah.
That was the Exeter, right?
Yep, the Exeter, yeah.
The planet ended a biological war, and they came back too soon for an antidote to work, and I guess it affected the ship and everybody died. Yeah. So the captain, I guess, became somehow convinced that the planet had some fountain of youth. So he totally goes down there and says, oh, forget the Prime Directive, I'm going to take sides with these comms or whatever. So, and the whole idea is that Kirk is trying to deal with him while he's trying to convince these people that Spock is the devil and that, Kirk is there trying to mess with them. And basically, in the end, they just basically start fighting.
Yeah.
And they're Starfleet officers. Basically, in the end, they start like almost a gladiatorial situation.
Yeah.
So
more than once, because there was several times where Kirk and him go at it, with fists, and
right. Of course, the episode. So here's the deep thing about that. That was one of the scripts that Roddenberry submitted to NBC for the pilot. So he obviously had some idea of conflict in mind in the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm just going to point that out there. That was one of the scripts that he pointed out. I believe Gene wrote that one, didn't he?
I think so. Yeah, I
Omega
keep
Glory.
running off, but yeah.
So, and the next one is the ultimate computer. Now, of course, the conflict here is on multiple levels.
Mm.
The conflict kind of starts with Kirk being kind of in the position of almost losing a job because this computer might, and I mean, Bones overtly says it, oh, we all feel bad for the guy that loses his job to a machine.
Yeah.
You know, and then there's this whole thing about Commodore Wesley being kind of a jerk to Kirk because he's sitting there telling him most of the episode that he's useless.
Yeah.
And just finding little, and even calling him flat out Captain Donsel.
Yeah.
And so there's this conflict between Kirk, and obviously there's a war game going on, so there's intentional conflict. And Kirk is sort of being like, yeah, well, you're redundant. We're not going to need you anymore. We're going to have these automatic starships. And it's obviously not working because the M5 has problems. And then the other conflict comes when you understand where the problems come. Dr. Daystrom is a youth prodigy who is kind of defined himself by winning every prize, by doing well on everything. And when his M5 fails, he feels like it's his personal failure. And when the computer starts malfunctioning, he starts malfunctioning with it.
Yeah.
He's invested so much of his emotional energy in that. So there's this conflict where he just totally breaks down.
Yeah.
Because he's so interconnected with the fate of his computer. Because he has so much writing on his reputation with that.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's that three-way conflict there. The captain losing his position and, you know, being at odds with Commodore Wesley. And then Daystrom losing perspective with his own, you know, creation.
Yeah.
So there's like three-ways conflict there, you know, if you look at it that way. And, of course, a conflict between person and device, you know. There's that conflict.
That's true, yeah.
Which, you know, I mean, you look anywhere on social media today, we could have that M5 argument about AI. It's just that's what that story is.
Yeah.
So there's a conflict right there that we're dealing with right now in the present time. So I think Star Trek maybe a little ahead of the curve on that one, you know.
Yeah.
Now, I was debating whether to include this next TOS one because it's sort of kind of an outside influence, but not. So I decided to include it. Was the Enterprise incident. Now, I know Kirk is acting kind of intentionally screwed up in the beginning.
Yeah.
But, you know, before, you know...
I think there was a conflict in that episode that wasn't so apparent, and it was between Spock and the Romulan commander. Because I think,
that's a good point. She's trying to kind of sway him a little bit.
Well, I think he was developing feelings for the Romulan commander that it wasn't like he was pretending he did. He really did, I think, have feelings for her. And there was this conflict about, you know, how far he was willing to go to, you know, cover Kirk's rear while Kirk was trying to steal the cloaking device. And, you know, he was willing to sacrifice his own life, you know, and it didn't seem like it was like a happy moment, you know, for Spock because, and especially for the Romulan commander who was really falling for him. And when they're taken away, remember when they go back to the Enterprise and they're in the corridor and they're going down the turbo lift, they have sort of this conversation where they're going to try to keep this relationship that they kind of started.
Yeah, and you can see that it's not a ruse. There was something that developed there, and she thought it was all for real, and he kind of had some real things happening. So
I mean, because he was a Vulcan, it's not so easy for the audience to really see that this was not something that was happening unwillingly with Spock, you know, because I don't know, I don't think maybe it just came off that way. It just seemed like at first maybe he was just playing her, but it wasn't really that way at all. It was all along. It was just him. He really liked her.
Right.
So
that's TOS. I mean, I don't know if there's any honorable mentions for you, but those are the ones that I thought had a very significant amount of conflict between characters.
Yeah.
Now, the Next Generation, and the reason I think this is important is because that's where that no conflict among human character trope was always mentioned. Yeah. Except no, because I have plenty of examples from that first season. One example is Justice, and I brought that one up because it's a Prime Directive kind of story. Yeah. And basically, the whole idea is they're on this, I guess, Hellspaw planet, which is where they're all blonde and wear white and we're into oil and running around in some kind of water reclamation plant. But anyway, the point is that it feels like a very awkward health spa. But anyway, the whole thing is that aside from this very Caucasian paradise, I must add, they have this whole situation where they have this godlike alien who they think commands them to give a lethal injection to anybody who breaks even the dumbest law.
Yeah.
And so Wesley just innocently violates one of those laws, completely out of the know. And what happens is Crusher finds out about it, and of course she goes into her instant mothering mode, and that puts everybody into conflict. Picard has to accomplish his mission and obey the Prime Directive, but he's also bound to protect a member of his crew.
Yeah.
Not only that, but they've just planted a colony in an area that's run by this entity who doesn't think, that there should be humanoid life forms in what he feels is his. They feel is whatever it is in their domain. So Picard's dealing with that conflict, and also Data in his babbling stage. He doesn't realize he's babbling, but in his way, he unintentionally furthers Crusher's bewilderment at what's happening to Wesley. And he realizes that, I do tend to babble. So there's a conflict of Data learning about conflicting human emotions when they're in crisis, and Picard having to deal with Edo themselves and this entity.
I mean, the larger story to that was so oppressive because, you had to deal with this situation that really was unresolvable. I mean, there was no way if Picard followed the rule of law that he could save Wesley.
Right.
That's why it all came at the end that, laws can't be just.
Right. And in the end, he basically just found a nice way of saying that, the Prime Directive is not absolute, so I'm just going to break it because I can.
Yeah.
He just says, well, laws aren't absolute and this is an exception.
Yeah.
Basically saying, well, the Edo Lord may agree with me, but Star Wars is going to have me on a hot plate when I get back. But which they did later on. That's another story. But and obviously, and the thing is I think his point was that their laws were way more absolute than the Prime Directive was.
Yeah.
And where there was a life or death, where the Prime Directive was a little bit, and the Next Generation I noticed played a lot with that Prime Directive, especially in the first season. That became an issue. And in the Prime Directive, I mean, that could be a source of conflict right there.
Oh yeah, right from the beginning. Yeah.
Because think about it. I mean, there are cases where interference might be the best option, but if it's not there, we'll get messy there. So the next one is again an outside group, but home soil. The crew meet up with terraformers, one of whom is very, kind of romanticizing everything, and the others are all hiding something, and one of them gets killed.
Yeah. And
basically, they start realizing there's some sort of inorganic life form involved, and they all kind of had an inkling about it, but didn't want to explore because they were afraid their project would go down. Yeah. So there's a conflict with people hiding facts, and with dealing with an alien entity that sees humanoid life as inferior to it and interfering with their life cycle. Yeah. So they have to convince a life form very different than them they're not their enemy. And basically, these people will apologize. They will apologize for killing you, basically. Because they thought the planet was lifeless, but it was just a unique form of life.
Yeah.
So, there was that conflict of, dealing with new life forms and seeing them for what they were, and exploitation, and basically dealing with people who are afraid of rocking their boat and being dishonest. So there's a conflict among everybody involved in that case.
Yeah.
I just remembering that episode. So that's the first year. Symbiosis. Back to the Prime Directive again with that one. We deal with two people who are basically involved in a drug trafficking relationship. One of whom are apparently so high all the time they can't repair their own ships. And another one who are basically pushers, because one planet became advanced, the other didn't. But the planet that became advanced had a plague, and the other planet had a treatment for it, but they became addicted. So, they said, we can just make them think if they don't take it, they'll get sick again. So they created this parasitic relationship with them based on lies. So when Crusher finds out about this, she gets all bones about it. We got to go down and stop this whole situation because the Prime Directive applies here. This is a relationship we can't stop. But they're innocent people being exploited and blah, 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 blah. So in the end, Picard ends up giving them their drug, but not their equipment to repair their ships.
Yeah.
And Crusher's still upset, but he has to explain the philosophy of the Prime Directive to her. And there's conflict between the wants of Picard and what Crusher thinks is the right thing to do in that.
Yeah.
Because Picard is trying to follow the law of the Federation as well as he possibly can in a tight situation. And one of these people, I believe it's the Breckians, are totally manipulating the Prime Directive to their liking.
Yeah.
And in the end, he even says, well, you didn't mind as long as it worked in your favor.
Yeah.
Like any drug lord will do, they'll try to manipulate things so they come out looking good somehow.
That's right.
And, and of course, a lot of people kind of point out that this was kind of the Nancy Reagan just say no episode. But I think it dealt with it on a broader level. I think it dealt with a conflict of,
I just felt like you said, it was another story that talks
Prime Directive story.
Yeah, Prime Directive story. And it talks about, what can happen to somebody if they get addicted to a drug and you have a symbiotic relationship with your supplier where, if you don't get that drug, when you need it and the guy's not there to give it to you, you're going to fall apart, but you have to go through that withdrawal in order to come out the other side. And, they really couldn't say that, to them because they didn't want to help them. They basically wanted to leave them as they found them at the end of the episode. So that way, Picard gave them their drug, but he kept their equipment they needed to fix the ship. So basically left them the way they found them. And so as evolution plays out, eventually that whole world is going to become, withdrawn from the drug that they were taking all this time. So,
Picard was like, well, there's no perfect solution to this, but this is, and I mean, even he admitted it's more to protect us than anything.
Yeah, yeah.
But, her being a doctor, her thing was that, well, I don't want to see people hurting.
Yeah.
But like I said, the Prime Directive, if you look at medical implications, could be a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
But it kind of explored that conflict of just Starfleet's General Order 1 in that respect.
Yeah.
Now we're into season 2. Now, this episode is more about a conflict between, again, person and perceived machine, and that's Measure of a Man. You have every...
That was a good one for conflict there.
Well, right, because it's a courtroom kind of episode, but basically the conflict is with Picard, with Philippa Louvois, who I'm guessing was a former flame of his.
Yeah, it was like maybe they dated or something before.
Right, but she was also like that woman who was her name? The one who was in the court-martial? Ariel Shaw.
Yeah.
He was kind of like that, where she's like, I persecuted you in the Stargazer trial. And like, oh, you enjoyed it too much. And they're kind of sparring. But again, it comes down to that whole dynamic we joked about, where it's like, oh, poopy head, I love you. That kind of relationship they had. But anyway, the whole thing is that, so in the end, she's like, well, you know what? I've got to deal with this. And this Maddox has come along and said, well, I can disassemble Data and we can make new androids, and this ethical conflict comes up. And even Data, in its own computerized way, is basically saying that, do I qualify as an object, a thing, a property of Starfleet? And then even Guinan, throws in that thing about disposable people and kind of throws Picard into that place where he's like, well, you're talking about slavery.
Yeah.
And she says, well, I wouldn't put it so harshly. And he said, no, that's exactly what you're talking about. So he realizes that this is, this is an issue of potentially turning Data into a possible slave race.
Yeah.
And of course, in the Federation, they're very embarrassed. You constantly hear this embarrassment, particularly about slavery. The slavery of people, the slavery of animals for food purposes. They've mentioned that in TNG. So they're like, we don't want to see, indentured servitude or slavery occur within our century with an android. So they're trying to establish a situation there. And Riker is hired to be a prosecution, which is hard for him because he's like, I consider Data a comrade and a friend, yet I have to prove that he's not really human.
Yeah.
So there's this conflict of people doing things that they're not comfortable doing. And even Philippa, her situation is like, this is the kind of a hard question for me being a JAG officer out here in the middle of nowhere to deal with. Because she's not a polished brass person in Starfleet anymore. She's out in the middle of this obscure starbase. And it's like, okay, so Now I get to answer these really heavy philosophical questions about what constitutes his life, but I'm going to give Data his life back.
Yeah.
And again, that all comes to fruition in the end. But, there's conflict in every aspect of that episode, if you look at it.
Yeah.
Every aspect of it. Another one is, I guess it could qualify as another Prime Directive story, and it involves Data, is Pen Pals. He is doing some experimenting with the communications on the ship, and he encounters this young girl who's on this planet that's experiencing volcanic problems. And he starts communicating with her, even though she doesn't know there's intelligent life on other planets. And, Picard wants him to kind of cease communications, and because of that. But Data doesn't want to. So Riker, Troy, Pulaski, and I think Picard and Riker get involved in this really, really heady discussion about what Data should be doing.
Yeah, and Worf too.
Yeah. So, and finally, Riker's like, what a perfectly vicious little circle.
Yeah.
Because, they all have these very polarized points of view on the whole thing. And then that conversation right there is one of the most heated conflicts I've ever heard in a TNG episode. And then Data breaks it by basically playing her calls for help. And Picard's like, your voice in the dark is now turned into a plea. So, Data's like, yeah, well, I get it. I know there's a human situation here, but we got to get back to the basics here. This girl's in trouble, and his android sense is basically saying a person in trouble needs to be helped, period. This is a one-on-one thing.
Yeah.
Where they're debating ethical issues and emotional things that are involved in the law. So there's a lot of conflict going on over one guy's decision to, for an unemotional android, more or less put something like a heart before logic. Even though he supposedly doesn't have that kind of heart,
Just one of those episodes where, like Gene Roddenberry said, we get him as close to being human as possible, but not quite human.
Right, where it's sort of a kind of logical compassion, if you can imagine such a thing.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah.
And so they're debating it on another level, but he's like, well, 1-to-1, she must be rescued because, she's a life form, and it's unethical to let a life form, especially a young one, die.
Yeah.
Even if they don't know this or that. So it's playing on, is emotionalism something cognitive, or does it develop in other ways? So that's it. But again, this is
anger when he brings the kid up on the bridge.
Right, yes, because again, Picard, not liking kids, say, you brought a kid on my bridge.
Yeah, but it's like,
that's the worst thing in the world, on my bridge. Children are poison, take them away,
Bring out the guillotine.
Right. It's almost a very Victorian Scrooge thing.
I know it.
Like, how and he says he's not comfortable with it. But they're like, humbug. Little children should be put in the brig. He's really upset that just a child is on his bridge.
I know it. He had the whole crew on pins and needles there about that one, I'll tell you.
Oh, and let's not forget O'Brien's out-and-out racist outburst in the transporter room. You're going to take that with you?
Oh, you're going to take that with you? Yeah, I know.
Like, oh, Jesus, there's a little racism in here, too. There's a lot of conflict happening in here, too.
Yeah,
that was straight up racist. I mean,
here he is. He's on a ship full of people that are all like different races and stuff, but he says that to the girl. I mean, you're taking that to the bridge. It's like, come on, I thought you.
Yeah, that was just. But so again, they're showing that even in the 24th century, there are still some people, who actually see other life forms maybe they don't understand as being problematic to them.
Yeah, yeah.
And like I said, O'Brien only showed that actually one other time with the Cardassians, but that was more because he had an encounter with them.
Yeah.
But so you kind of understood his prejudice against them being based on past experience. But with her, he didn't know her.
Yeah.
There were he walked up to every alien and say, why are you talking to that?
Yeah.
So there was all these weird conflicts. O'Brien's bizarre outburst of racism in the transporter room. Picard acting like he wanted to put children in the brig, basically, when she came on the bridge. Like, you have a child on my bridge. You will assume your station. Like, never mind Klingons or Romulan or Borg invaders. Children are the worst thing to have on the bridge. So this Picard's weird. I'm not just comfortable. I don't like children on the bridge. They should go to the brig and be burned alive. Just being so emphatic about it. So yeah, there was a lot of conflict in that.
Yeah.
And in the end, Data is kind of the peaceful, sweet presence. Like, well, she won't remember me because Pulaski wiped her memory. But, and he's like, well, I did the right thing. And even Picard's like, calm about it. He's not saying, but you brought a child on my bridge.
Yeah.
He did that once, but he wasn't harping on that. So I guess all was kind of dealt with. I get these two out of order. I'm sorry, but it kind of happened that way. The next one is the Icarus factor. Now, this really doesn't deal with interpersonal conflict among the crew. It deals with Riker having two conflicts.
Yeah.
For some reason in the Next Generation, he was offered all these commands but didn't want to leave the Enterprise.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the other Starfleet ships of that time, I take it the Enterprise was a pretty sweet spot. So maybe he just liked the fact that he was on the friggin' Love Boat of starships and just didn't want to leave. But
he didn't want to get stuck on some old bucket from the 80 years ago.
I mean, like you're gonna stick him on an old Constitution or Excelsior class ship that's all falling apart, and So basically, his idea is that I'd rather be a little fish in a big pond than be a big fish in a little pond.
Yeah.
But that was the conflict he was dealing with. So they brought on an attaché who was going to kind of transition to his command, and it was his estranged father.
Yeah.
So he had that father conflict in that. So, we see that in the 24th century, and his mother had died, and that was the source of the conflict. You see that family conflicts haven't just gone away because of the future.
Yeah. And there was sort of a little bit of a conflict between him and Pulaski because Pulaski dated him.
Right. Pulaski dated his father, and she thought that Riker misunderstood him.
Yeah.
And, and in the end, there was a conflict between Pulaski and him because they're trying to solve their problem through martial arts for some reason.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, we can't solve our problems, so let's just play some obscure game where we poke each other with these big sticks.
Fight with Q-tips, and, it's just, look at these giant Q-tips.
Yeah, it's like, all of a sudden, well, we're fathers in conflict, but no, we're Klingons, we're going to fight with sticks now. So, and then basically Pulaski is just being very 24th century, saying, haven't we moved beyond the need to resolve our problems with physical conflict? So,
Not with men.
And she doesn't like it on her end. Troy doesn't like that Riker's doing it, and they're talking about, they're going to kill each other because they're men, and blah, 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 blah. So there's this man thing.
It's a guy thing,
Right. And there's this whole thing with really, in the end of the day, Riker and his father both being hurt.
Yeah.
By his wife's death and Riker's mother's death, and kind of blaming it on each other.
Yeah.
And then they're sitting there ready to kill each other, and they start having this father-son conversation. They put down these sticks, and all works out. Sort of. Yeah. And Riker doesn't take the command because, he's on the best ship in the fleet. So,
which was something his father never expected. Remember, he told Troy he expected he would take that because he likes to challenge. But Riker, for some reason, didn't want to go that way.
Mean, I got to tell you, if I was in that position, I think I'd rather be a first officer on the Enterprise than go be command some bucket.
The thing about that thing was that it seemed to me like Riker was given that command a little too soon. I realized before in Encounter at Farpoint, there was an offer for him to take command of a ship, but he turned it down to take that job on the Enterprise. So that was like the first time he turned it down. Then the second time was in Icarus Factor, where he was given a command and he turned that one down. And then when we see him later on, that Admiral, when it was the best of both worlds, and he said, look, he's going to hurt his career if he keeps, refusing these offers for command, essentially.
Yeah, people don't think of him as that Enterprise guy, basically.
Yeah. So it's like, he needs to either, crap or get off the pot, as I used to say,
Yeah.
Yeah,
basically, even Picard in Best of Both Worlds was like, why are you still here?
Yeah.
Which would come into but Best of Both Worlds, we're going to be getting to that in a little bit. So,
yeah.
We're going to go into season 3 now, into the days of the turtleneck uniforms. So we've got Ensigns of Command, where Data has to deal with a very stubborn human colony on this planet that are obsessed about aqueducts.
Yeah.
Totally obsessed with aqueducts. Their whole thing is that, well, these are species that are going to come and take your planet. We built an aqueduct. We cannot leave it. The whole episode is that we're going to die for an aqueduct.
I built a swimming pool. We ain't leaving here because there's a swimming pool over there.
I just found it weird. Their whole thing was that, and they said, well, it's water. No, it's blood and it's sweat. And, they built an aqueduct.
When I remember watching that for the first time, I just didn't get it. What the hell was so special about that stupid...
Well, I think the whole joke is how people get obsessed over stupid little things.
I know it.
And this guy is like, and even the people are like, we can move this colony anywhere we want. This guy's like, we built this aqueduct. We got this aqueduct with blood and sweat in it. And like I said, remember, in my young mind, I never really heard that term before. So when I first saw it, I thought, well, Data, he says, what is this I'm holding? And Data says, it's water, this. And like,
Yeah.
and he says, it's blood and sweat. Like, no, it looks like water to me. I didn't realize he was being theatrical.
Yeah.
This is the blood and sweat of our ancestors who built this aqueduct. I was like, well, they died, not you.
Overly theatrical.
So then Data has to basically take that on and say, I can turn this into a pile of debris. They're going to do even worse with this. So do your aqueduct, you know?
You'd sacrifice the entire colony just to protect a little man-made river. I mean, what the hell?
Right. I mean, I found that they were making that what was that guy, Goshevin?
Yeah,
He made such a big deal over an aqueduct.
Yeah, I never got that. You know, it took me years to figure that out.
One of these guys who was like, oh, my father died up there on that hill, so I must protect him with all my honor. It's like, so you Klingon? You know, just really overdressing that. But, I mean, I found it weird that when the species is going to come down there who sees humanoid life forms as nothing, and they're concerned over a bunch of aqueduct.
Well, here's the other part of that argument, too, is like, the humans of the future, obviously, from what I understand what Gene Roddenberry said, is they don't get attached to materialistic things like, you know, like we do today. And, you know, in the future, humans would just, you know, not be, you know, like I said, you know, I mean, even though they make stuff and they're proud, it feels like they get attached to it still. I mean,
I don't think that Goshen was attached to the aqueduct per se, but like I said, he's like, oh, this represented all the hard work of our ancestors building this aqueduct, so we have to protect it because this represents our ancestors. Sentimentalizing things.
Yeah.
Like what humans still do, I'm sure. They still sentimentalize an object over a source of labor.
I guess it would, because here you got Kirk over sentimentalizes the Enterprise in every way possible. You know, you
mean that whole thing like in Naked Time was like, now I know why they call her she.
Yeah.
He's basically anthropomorphizing the ship and then telling Mudd's women, she's a beautiful lady and we love her, and they're winking out over that one.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah. And then Sulu actually is very logical. Says, why do we always call an inanimate object she, like she's a fine ship?
Yeah.
Good point, Sulu. But anyway, we're back in TOS here, but we're in Next Generation. So yeah, the conflict in that episode is the Data, who's very logical, has to convince colonists who are kind of sycophantic with this guy.
Yeah.
But they kind of know they have to leave too. They're not really bad people. They're kind of like, you know, they're afraid of this guy because he's going to cause trouble for them over an aqueduct. You know, he's really obsessed about this blood and sweat and this labor, and he's all high and mighty about it. And you know, that gives Data a chance to deal with the human conflict that he's not familiar with. Human obsession, really.
Yeah.
You know, so that an obsession leads right to conflict at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it was like his first time he was ever faced with this human kind of situation, and he didn't know what to do. Because remember, he called Riker for help, and Riker was like, "Well, look, we're busy up here. You're gonna have to figure this thing out on your own." You know, it's like, you know.
Now, okay, when in season 3, I know it's gonna have a lot of this conflict issue. This is another family-themed episode, and a really very sad one because it deals with not having a parent, but losing a parent, and that is the bonding. And basically, what that deals with is the conflict of a young person who loses both their parents. He's on a starship. And then Picard, you know, when his mother dies, he takes that opportunity to say, I never felt that children on a ship was good because this could happen and blah, 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 blah.
Here we go. Yeah.
Here we go with this. Don't want children on a starship. I was always questionable. I don't know. Why was I assigned to this ship? Blah, 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 blah. And Troy tells them that, well, you know, like you said, in today's military, there are children who are on board, you know, on army bases, and they have to face back their parent, or parents might be killed in a war, and that's a very real thing. That's not science fiction. That's very much reality.
Yeah.
And you know, the kid is keeping his anger kind of in, but the conflict there is that Crusher goes to Wesley to talk to this kid about it, and he's kind of recalling conflicts about his father dying when he was young.
Yeah.
So, you know, and then Picard has to, again, deal with children, which he's apparently very terrible at and doesn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And he's sitting there preaching to Troy that this is such a terrible thing to have children on Star Trek because this can happen, and we don't want this to happen. So in the end, what's happening is that Worf has a conflict with it because he feels responsible for his mother's death, and he wants to make this boy his brother.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, that may not be good for him right now because he might blame you the same way you blame yourself.
Yeah.
Which is what happened. He did kind of blame Worf in a way.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that an alien tried to come back and pose his mother and make things even more confused. But, I mean, So basically it was just like, basically it's like we have a child in a really bad way, and an alien makes the whole situation worse, and the crew have to fix everything.
It's like everybody was trying to, undo what happened. Even the aliens on the surface wanted to take responsibility for what the kid lost, and then Worf wanted to take responsibility for the girl dying on his mission. It's like everybody wanted to do something for this.
And speaking of conflict, the conflict there was so real and so in your face.
Yeah.
Look at that kid, that Jeremy Astor, and say, "Can I just reach in there and give that kid a hug? What he's going through?" It was just so. Oh my goodness, it was just so very real the way they depicted that.
Yeah.
That they actually was like, he wasn't some anonymous kid. Even though you've never seen him before, get the boy, he's just been put through absolute hell here.
Yeah.
So you just felt for the character, and in the end, and I always felt bad we never saw him again, because Worf made this bonding with him in the end, and he became part of his family. I would love to have seen what happened to him in the end.
They got that story idea from at the time where Princess Diana was going around advocating against landmines. Remember, she was going around trying to get countries to get rid of.
Yes, because his mother was killed by a mine.
Yeah. So they got the idea from.
I didn't know that came from the landmine idea.
Yeah. Yeah,
ripped from the headlines thing. Star Trek's version of.
That's what it's good for. Is it takes today's problems and it presents it to us. In a way
and again, no conflict there, because you had responsibility of death. You had this poor child who's going through these terrible things, and everybody trying to help him, but kind of disagreeing. And Picard saying like, "See, children on charges is a bad idea because this is what happens to them."
Yeah.
And then in the end, being forced, like, I got to get rid of all my annoyance at children being on the ship, and realize this.
And there was that thing between him and Crusher. Remember where Crusher finally admits to Picard about how he blamed him for his father not coming back.
In the end, where Wesley has to say, I was angry with you because you led the mission to kill my father, and I blamed you for a long time. And then when I finally came on the ship, presumably that episode where they went to that heart thing of his, he kind of learned not to blame him so much.
Yeah. So you had that kind of a resolution right there.
So again, the whole thing was, you get to a point I'm going to get to later in this episode. But so that was how that dealt with in the end. Now, the next one is, okay, there's a lot of courtroom dramas in here, I'm noticing.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to add another one in here now that I think about it, because I missed out on this originally. So it's going to be 27. This one is a matter of perspective, where Riker goes to this laboratory, scientific laboratory, where they're experimenting with this new fuel source called and the ship blows up, and he's implicated for blowing it up. Now, basically, it's that story of three people trying to tell what an elephant is by touch.
Yeah.
And each of them have a totally different story. One of them basically talks about Riker in what you consider now the Me Too situation, and accused him of being an outright rapist.
Yeah.
Then another one is basically saying that he had an affair with the guy's wife and blah, 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 blah. And then in the other one, Riker didn't deny that she pursued him, but that he kind of just didn't want to get involved in this little love triangle that was going on, or they were trying to get him into.
Yeah.
And but the whole thing is that, he was worried about Troy trusting him, because she could read everybody's emotions. And he's like, everybody's telling the truth as they remembered it. And he's like, well, I didn't do this. And, so Riker feels like his back is against the wall, because he thinks they should all trust him. But Troy is like, it's hard for me to tell what's guilty and what isn't here.
Because everybody believes what they're saying, essentially.
Because, like I said, because nobody has any self-doubt about it. They're all very convinced their story is true.
Yeah.
Riker and the two other women who have accused him of murder. And, of course, in the end, through some, little Sherlock Holmesian logic, another great element of Next Generation, especially when Data comes along. Minus the pipe this time. But anyway, so they're going around. They figure out the very thing that he was experimenting with killed him.
Yeah.
Because he was trying to use it for unsavory purposes. So
it was a good lesson at the end where, you're saying, things like that in a courtroom drama, it hinges very much on evidence and what you bring to it. You can't just take people's word for something, because there's like so many different sides.
Right, because, that could lead to you're saying conjecture, which is not legally binding.
Yeah.
So,
hang a man on conjecture.
And they were so ready to friggin' throw Riker under the bus in that episode. I can't remember the name of the species in that, but they were all ready to kind of throw him under the bus, because they're like, well, there's so much evidence against him. But using the holodeck kind of helped, because they could recreate literally what happened.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when they found out what was happening, that's what they did. The next episode is, again, another kind of sad one, but a favorite of mine because it's a character I wish they'd kept on, the Offspring. There are several factors of conflict in this one. Data basically creates a child, an android child, who doesn't have a gender versus the gold android.
Yeah.
And Picard gives him an absolute grilling.
I know it, which was really
like,
out of character.
How could you dare do this without consulting me? Don't you know the implications? Like, Data doesn't know. I just found that weird that Picard dressed him up and down like that. So
I mean, this is supposed to be a guy who likes to explore, or meet on, things that are unknown. I mean, he always looked at Data as sort of a great mystery and something to learn from. And then Data creates another, and then he's acting like, what the hell were you thinking? Basically trying to, like the father, going after us as a kid, for making a mistake. And I'm thinking, doesn't sound like Picard in any friggin' way. You'd think he'd be like more fascinated with the idea.
I think the conflict there was that maybe he was starting to see Data almost like a son in a way. Maybe,
I guess. I don't
know.
Like
he was saying that, a mother who might find out that her son is sexually active and say, don't you know the risk of doing that? And kind of that whole thing. And where Data's just thinking, well, I did what I did at this conference by protocol or whatever. And he's like, well, there's so much responsibility,
When he was talking to Troy in the corridor, and he's sitting there saying, I can't see how Data can look at this thing that's got the strength of 10 men as being, a life, some. Basically, he was talking against the argument that he made when he was trying to say that Data is sentient. Now he's trying to talk against what he just done in that season where he's,
Yeah, and it's weird how Picard all of a sudden got all anti-android when he's trying to protect Data.
Yeah.
So it's like, wait a minute, and Data's almost like, well, I'm an android, yet you're speaking for me, but speaking against another android to speak for me. So again, it showed the human contradiction, even of Picard.
Yeah.
It didn't make me dislike Picard, maybe see him as more human. That, and I think he realized his flaw when it actually came true. This admiral comes on board the ship, who's not much different from that Bruce Maddox in Measure of a Man, who essentially sees Data and other androids as kind of property.
Yeah.
And he wants to separate Lal from Data. And Lal is just a young android who's taking on a female human persona, who is just learning and growing and adapting and making mistakes that I suppose a young android might, like any child. And he's looking at it from the point of view of that, she's messing up in school and he's got her working as a cocktail waitress and blah, 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 blah. And, and Dave's like, well, he has kids, but he wanted his kids sent away for experimental, things because of that. So it brings up those Measure of a Man questions again. So Picard in the middle of it is almost like, well, you know what? Early on, I was totally against Data creating this android and berating him for it, like you said. But, now I have to kind of stand up for her rights.
Yeah.
And in the end, of course, she dies, and it's very sad because, we kind of got to like this character and want to see her grow more. And she started having abilities that Data didn't, like emotions. And, the Admiral intentionally confused it. And he had to go in there and try to help her out. And even he's moved by seeing how Data is working with her.
Yeah.
So it all comes down to characters, in odds with each other, but then kind of, seeing unexpected things happen and having to deal with, all feeling bad because Data can't really feel any emotion over her being gone. He integrates her programming back into his, so he has her experiences, but even still, they all kind of feel for him.
Which, when they showed that episode, I was thinking, so Data knows how to make skin look human on her because she looked like a regular person. So it's like, well, why didn't Data, have himself fixed up so that way his skin didn't have to have that gold tinge to it where he could just
Data felt that just made him unique.
Maybe, yeah, I guess.
And the part of being human is not all humans have the same color. So he figured that, and he also implied that he could give her better pigmentation than he could himself. And sure that her programming might have been different, her makeup might have been a little different.
Yeah.
I mean, now the Borg Queen honestly grafted human skin onto. That's a whole other story.
Yeah.
That was human skin. It wasn't like she was just spraying.
Yeah, she wasn't creating something from scratch. She was actually pulling skin off of real people there and putting it on them.
Right. Yeah. Basically headhunting in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Yeah, so that was that one. So there's a lot of conflict happening there. Now we're into the best of both worlds. And, you mentioned, again, the Riker and the ship thing with that.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the whole thing. They brought in Elizabeth Dennehy's character, who is the first character to really outright compete with Riker.
Oh, yeah.
Outright compete with him. To the point where she actually told him on the turbo lift, speaking frankly, you're in my way.
She was like the absolute worst version of Riker. It's like, there's Riker, which, had sort of a little bit of an arrogance, and then there's like Super Riker on the other side who was like really arrogant.
Right, and she's like the Devil Wears Prada Riker.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to come in and say, well, if all you know to do is play it safe, make room for somebody who doesn't. And, he's looking at her like, is them fighting words?
Yeah.
You want to get down? That was kind of
a friggin' bulkhead there at one point.
Right, but then again, he says, well, I know that she's an expert on the Borg, but the problem is she's letting me know it every 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you're going to have to work with me because I'm Queen Borg here, so.
I'm taking your spot. Get out of here.
Right, so then when Picard gets assimilated, of course, she has to come in there and work directly with him on the situation.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they have to deal with that competition.
They have to work together now.
Right, so and this is not the first time Riker faced an issue like this. We'll get into this a little later. So,
yeah.
But there was another connotation to that one. But this one was just like sparks of anger all the way, because he was looking at her like, well, I'm ambitious and arrogant to a certain degree, but I also want to be safe. She doesn't care.
Yeah.
She's going to take those risks that I won't. So I don't care for her that much because, she, like you said, she was a super Riker.
Yeah.
She's like Riker with steroids. It was like, yeah, I don't care about. I'll do what I need to do to make things work.
Yeah.
I'm not always going to play it safe. I'm going to take serious risks here. And if you want to sit there and play it safe, make room for me,
Yeah.
She was like, and that created massive conflict. But usually Riker is like, I'm the guy in charge, I'm all cool. It's like, oh, so she's going to come in and take charge now, huh? That was the whole thing there.
Yeah.
And they were offering him his own ship, but then when the Borg thing happened, and plus the fact, just the conflict of having the captain all of a sudden being used against humanity.
Yeah.
Riker was like, well, I need Picard here to advise me, and Guinan to say, hey, he's not here anymore. This is your ship now.
Yep.
And you get a woman over here who's going to take it all over for you if you don't make the right decision.
Yeah.
And she is sitting there waiting for you to back down so she can just take the whole thing over.
He has to command the ship his way because that's the only way Picard would be unknowing what's going to happen next. If he tries to do everything Picard would, then he's going to anticipate.
Right, and that's why Crusher, Guinan was saying that you have to let Picard go in the command structure, because if Picard knows already everything then you're not going to have any hope. So.
Yeah.
So again, there was that conflict of that, and just the preparation for the Borg invasion. So that was like hyperactive conflict there. Then dealing with that whole Wolf 359 fiasco, which was just like the Federation was unprepared for that.
Yeah.
So again, we're introducing a lot of conflict within the Federation. What are we going to do now?
Yeah.
Now that we've got this, our fleet is woefully unprepared.
Yeah.
It was like Pearl Harbor almost.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you got all your ships are like 80 years old.
Like I said, they had the Chekhov class and they had the New Orleans class, which are not old.
No,
but still, they were kind of small and not really prepared for the Borg, obviously. So
go boldly charging off in an Excelsior class ship and putting the admiral of the fleet in there.
I thought they were putting him on an 80-year-old ship like that.
I mean, it was doomed from the minute. It's like, what the hell you think you're doing? You're setting this friggin' thing.
I mean, that would have been like taking the Federation president during that time and sticking him on that same Class J transport that Harry Mudd used it with a Delta Ray.
Yeah.
Issues,
so I think they learned a lesson. Starfleet learned a lesson. Say, look, okay, it's time to retire these old ships here and start making some new ones here, because
and use them for certain things, but not put them in a battle with the Borg.
Yeah, battles are that's no good. You can't do it.
So anyway, yeah, I got to go back a little bit because I forgot one episode that it took me years to realize this, because when I was younger, I always saw the Starfleet. Gaze McFadden brought this up. I always saw Star Trek people as role models. Being stronger people than I was. There was only one time I ever saw the Star Trek crew act like real people around me completely, and that was a little ways back, and that was Hollow Pursuits. They get a guy on the ship, this Barclay, who is not exactly perfect, shall we say.
He's a nervous wreck.
He's a nervous wreck. He's very anxiety prone. and they're treating him like a pariah.
Yeah, it's like, oh, so you're not, we don't want you because you're not like us, or yeah, you get this sort of hatred to him.
And then they decided to see him as annoying, almost like that kid on the playground is like, well, because you're not like us, I'm just going to ice you out and not like you.
Yeah.
So, I just found it weird because that was the one time they weren't quite like role models. They were acting creepy and obnoxious. But the whole thing in that was the conflict was that they had to realize that, hey, you know what? We're all so polished brass on this ship. Now we got one guy who doesn't quite fit in the same way we do.
Yeah, and I was really hating Riker in that episode, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, Riker was kind of being a dick to Barclay.
Yeah.
Now, Geordi was sort of uncomfortable around him, and I found that weird because if you look at Geordi, he's kind of aloof in a lot of ways himself. How many other crew members would get in the navigation seat and say, I got a bogey at a 5 o'clock tangent?
Yeah.
Geordi kind of had his own way about things, but see, Geordi was extroverted and he was very, very confident, where Barclay was just kind of an awkward, kind of like that, what was her name? Gomez, remember her?
Scared and,
Right, but nobody ever gave her a hard time, but they gave Barclay the hardest ribbing.
They should have made Barclay more like an ensign instead of a lieutenant, because by the time you become a lieutenant, you've gone through enough stuff where you would have probably overcome a little bit of that nervousness and stuff. And
of course, one of the more humorous elements of conflict is that, he's sort of like one of these guys who likes to work things out in diaries, except he works them out in holodecks, which he creates mini Riker.
And how many of us wouldn't want to just spend a lot of time on the holodeck? Come on, they made it look like that was something stupid and weird, like, he shouldn't be on here all the time. Any one of us would have been on the holodeck a lot.
I just think with Riker, he was just upset because he made him this little midget guy.
Yeah.
Where's the fight? Did I miss it? Just making Riker into this little, foolish, naive character.
Everybody was like the Three Musketeers or something.
Right, and Troy's laughing. He's like, oh, well, you are very tall and you're intimidating. She's kind of enjoying it until she finds out about the goddess of empathy. And Riker says, we have to get inside this man's head. He's like, oh, cast off your inhibitions. And she's like, I'll muzzle it. So you see them all kind of conflicted in a kind of a humorous way about dealing with Barclay, who is just kind of making, and in the beginning, he actually has a very realistic outlook of the crew, except he's the hero in the situation, and Troy shamelessly throws himself at her.
Yeah.
So, but in the end of it, he turns him into this medieval fantasy where Wesley has his finger in a pie for some reason.
More stuff in his face.
I just found it weird, like he's a little boy who pulled out a plum, like he just turned into like some little fairy tale kid character.
Yeah.
And then again, basically has Picard, one of the three, and Riker like this little guy. So
yeah. And
then Data with a sword and everything. So it's like, yeah, he just basically wants to be a hero and everything. And Troy realizes this, well, until she sees herself in the simulation. Yeah. But, I just find it interesting in the first that they're not really treating Barclay that well.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been calling him names. I was going to mention it, Broccoli, which Picard almost slipped up and called him.
Yeah, after you ordered everybody else not to call him that, and he slips up and does it himself.
Yeah, and they're like, well, he makes everybody uncomfortable because he's not, So then Picard says, well, why don't you just give him a shot? He's new to the ship, blah, blah, blah. And then Riker even goes as far as saying, like he said, well, I think his previous spirit was just greasing the wheels a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm like, geez, you even barely know the guy. You know?
I mean, it seemed like Picard was the only one that was trying to be diplomatic about the whole thing, and everybody else was ready to throw Barclay under the bus, basically,
Yeah, so then in the end, I guess they all realized, we were kind of dicks to Barclay, so let's just not, So the conflict there is that
Geordi was the one that made the attempt to try to get to know him better, and it worked.
I think Geordi recognized that, well, of course, he could not be upset at him about the holodeck thing.
Yeah.
I mean, really?
Yeah.
Leah Brahms.
After the experiences he had with the holodeck.
So he's like, yeah, well, it's sort of fair, because, I mean, he had a little fantasy lover in there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's little Riker going to mean to him, I mean, and I mean, well, so I get to, and wasn't Geordi one of the sword fighters, too?
Yep.
So, yeah. So, it wasn't any kind of, big deal to him, because he used and his things, I fell in love with it, but I know it was time to come out. Well, maybe not so much, but
yeah.
Wait till Leah Brahms comes back to the ship, and then we'll see how ready you actually were. But anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, I think he recognized a little of himself in Barclay. Barclay was kind of introverted and awkward.
Yeah.
And he's like, and he even said, "Yeah, you're just shy, and we'll try to." So Geordi tried to befriend him and try to be good to him, but again, the characters evolve because the way I see that is that all those characters in that show kind of used to people coming on, kind of being polished brass or being ready to kiss up to you.
Yeah, because only the best get to serve on the Enterprise,
And even though Sonia Gomez was a bit nervous, she was basically licking everybody's boots, basically.
Yeah.
Remember, I was like, "Oh, Picard, it's all over you."
Yeah, just wiping her hands all over his shirt.
Like, yes, it's all over me, because she's nervous, but she's eager to please. Where Barclay is trying to do his job and trying to do well, but he keeps kind of asking everybody all these incessant questions and mumbling and just being awkward. And they're like, "Well, we don't know what to do with this guy. He's kind of a mess." And so I just found that interesting that one character created so much conflict among the crew in that one.
Yeah.
So, okay, now we're on to season 4. The Wounded. We kind of talked about the Cardassian issue. This is the introduction of the Cardassians. The brown-suited Cardassians with a little weird space helmet. But anyway, I'm glad they got rid of that space helmet. It looked kind of weird. Yeah. They almost like Borg things. I don't know why they had them.
It looked weird, yeah. It was weird.
So we had the first appearance of Mark Alamo as Gul Masset, not Ducat, but, same guy. Anyway, in this one we have a former captain of O'Brien's who is, as it turns out, correctly convinced the Cardassians, after a long war with the Federation, have developed some sort of secret outpost, and he's gone rogue. And the conflict there is that they're pursuing him, knowing that he's done wrong, but O'Brien is thinking that, well, I've dealt with I was in the Cardassian War, I know how the Cardassians were, and if this guy did something, it had to be a reason. Until he realized this guy was losing perspective, he didn't know how to make a name for himself in peacetime, even though Picard did think there might have been some merit to what he said, that O'Brien had to go over there and tell him, yeah, you know what, this is not the way to go about it. So again, the characters are in O'Brien and his former commander are in conflict, and that puts Picard in a position that isn't comfortable for him.
Yeah.
So, you have that in interesting issue. And it was one of the episodes where Keiko was in, where she didn't have a chance to be that annoying.
Yeah, actually, you're right about that, where, she was like the voice of reason for once.
Yeah, which is not, you can't say that for Deep Space Nine at all.
Yeah, I know. And, and then, of course, he had the conflict of trying to do something against his captain in order to stop him from doing something.
O'Brien, kind of the beginning of the O'Brien must suffer trope, because in this episode, basically, he rolled into this bad position. He's got to deal with Cardassians who he distrusts.
Yeah.
And who hurt him. And like he said, I don't hate Cardassians. I hate what I became because of Cardassians.
Yeah, when he's the 10 Ford, yeah.
Right. And then with this Captain Maxwell, I mean, he was his commanding officer. He trusted him and everything. He knows what he's doing is wrong, but he thinks there must be a good reason for it. But then he realizes that, I have to kind of deal with this now. Yeah. So basically, it's the idea of a person kind of going off the rails, and then kind of like Matt Decker with that Planet Killer and them having to deal with that.
Yeah.
Kind of a conflict between characters. So, remember we mentioned Geordi's holodeck addiction?
Oh yeah.
We're getting right back to that with Galaxy Child. He creates this holographic version of Leah Brahms, and there's a margin for error. And they kind of have this, well, I wouldn't say a fling, but this transitory infatuation, I guess you could call it. Every time he touches the engineer touching me,
Yeah.
So apparently he forgets that program is in the file and doesn't hide it.
Yeah.
The real Leah comes on board this ship, and he thinks, oh my goodness, this is going to be this little romantic adventure. So she meets her in the hall, and I always thought this little subtle part funny. He meets her in there, even kind of knowing this may not be, and he goes, hi. I just find it so funny the way he greets her. She's like, what's his problem, And then, of course, she totally was like, oh, so you're the one who fouled up my engine design. You're the one. Idea. So then, again, he's sitting there saying, okay, so I meet this woman that I thought was going to be this, my fantasy engineer infatuation, but no, she's a cold fish. And I'm spending the first 10 minutes arguing with her. It's like, we don't need to argue. Let's try to work this out. So he brings her to his quarters, where he basically plans a date with a woman he has really just met. Not knowing a thing about her in real life. Yeah. And she explains about her work and how important it is to her. And he thinks it's a prelude to some sort of encounter. But she's like, oh, well, I'm glad now that we settled this out, we can do with each other better. Goodbye, Commander.
Yeah.
So much for all his trouble, the music, the ambience, and all that stuff. So they deal with this big space pregnant
slug
pizza roll. I used to get like a pizza roll.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the slug pizza roll thingy that gives birth to another slug pizza roll thingy that starts basically feeding off the Enterprise like it's his mother. So all of a sudden, Leah Brahms and Geordi, being the engineers, are pressed into finding a solution for this problem. So Leah looks in the holodeck records and she finds his program. And she goes in there, and then Geordi finds out and then runs in there with Leah and Leah talking to each other. Like, oh boy.
You know, in today's world, that would be like a Me Too thing. You're like, you raped me.
you read the holographic version of me. This is, and of course, she's acting that way pretty much at first.
Yeah.
But it was a hologram. It was like, oh, I've been violated by your little holographic games. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And then he's like, well, you know something. I tried to befriend you, and I made a big mistake by offering you friendship. Blah blah blah. So then Guinan basically has to eliminate that by saying, oh, you know what? You saw through the visor that showed you what you wanted to see. You controlled everything there. Now the real one came along and ruined your little fantasy. So you have to see her for who she is.
Yeah. And
in the end, by seeing each other for their knowledge and using their instincts, they managed to sour the milk on the ship for this little pizza roll slug baby thing. And in the end, kind of come to a good understanding. So all is solved. Now, the Geordi totally messed that up in the beginning. So, like, stupid assumptions he should never have made. But again, the conflict arose over Geordi just not thinking. He should have really put that record away and not had it so accessible.
Yeah, I mean, I figured, you would think that because she was coming aboard and he knew it, that would have said, oh, wait a minute, I got that thing still stuck in the computer and I got to erase that. But, that would have been like a good giveaway to that, because I think everybody who was watching that episode and said, oh, geez,
the program's still in there. When they had the reach up in the Promethean sector. So anyway, the next one, well, I say this because they're not really human characters, but their lead characters in the show is Half a Life. And this is kind of a socially relevant story about elder care and euthanasia. But basically it deals with Lwaxana Troi in more or less her first drama of the show. Usually she was kind of comedic, but in this one, she's standing up for elder rights.
Yeah, the way she gave a significant role in this episode.
Right, she's ready to go down there and say, "I'm going to lead a revolt on this planet because this guy that I really like it has to die for no apparent reason." But what it really is, as Troi points out, is that she's afraid that's going to happen to her.
Yeah,
and that she doesn't want to see it happen to somebody else, and
being faced with her own mortality.
Right, and I said you're feeling very vulnerable and very mortal right now because you don't want to be somebody who dies before they die. And of course, if you know anything about Lwaxana Troi, obviously on the show, she may appear to be very frivolous, but she's actually fraught with massive levels of conflict.
Yeah, that's right.
Which are revealed later. And, desperate that her daughter be safe. I think that's part of also why she wants her to settle down and get married so she's not in danger on a starship.
Well, yeah, she wants her to not make the mistake that I guess she made, being alone and stuff. Because, we find out through, when she was Odo, how alone she really felt in her life when after her husband died and she never could find anybody to replace him. She didn't want to be alone, and she doesn't want that for her daughter.
Right. So you can see that she's very protective and very and very uptight and worried and has a lot of, it's like the tears of a clown almost. Yeah. In this episode, you start to see that because she wants this guy to appreciate and enjoy living, but his culture is not going to allow it. They're even going to terminate his work. So because of her interest in preserving his life, she's almost put Picard into a conflict, a literal war with his species.
Yeah.
Because she encourages this guy to seek asylum, the late David Ogen Steers, I should add. And he does. But it sets him apart from his daughter.
Yeah.
And it sets him apart from his species. So it creates a massive conflict over one person being too righteous.
The whole society was, having a turmoil over
Actually, now that I think about it, couldn't that be pretty much in every internet argument ever?
Yeah,
I mean, you think about it. It's like she's saying that, okay, well, I'm going to change this one person's life, but it's going to screw up this whole planetary thing.
Yeah.
And in the end, she realizes, well, if this is what his species had to be, I'd rather be there for him during this time than plunge a whole species into war because I'm a diplomat and I just can't do that. So, she realizes that in the end. But again, there's massive amounts of personal and interpersonal conflict there. Okay, so there's one more episode, and this is up till when Gene Roddenberry, not the whole TNG, because up until Gene Roddenberry was alive, and Ensign Ro. We bring in a new character to the show from a new species who is just rife with conflict.
Yeah, she is conflict.
Very beginning. Ro is snarky, and she is difficult. Riker has these prejudgments of her as not trustworthy. And like, oh, she's from that incident, blah, blah, blah. I don't want her on the ship. I don't trust her. She doesn't belong in that uniform, blah, 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 blah. And everybody, again, like with Barclay, they're all following suit. But this time, unlike Barclay, who is kind of sweet and endearing, Ro is not.
Yeah.
Ro doesn't want to be with her. She's like, I just want to be on this mission and get lost. I don't want to deal with you all. I know you don't trust me.
I mean, they pull her out of prison, was it?
Yeah, I think they pulled her out of prison. So she's in 10 forward, and Guinan comes over and says, oh, do you mind? She's like, yes, I mind.
Yeah.
So Guinan just sits there anyway. And he says, well, I heard this and I heard that. And they start talking. And all of a sudden, Guinan says, well, you need to talk to Picard because I consider you a friend. He's like, oh, well, Guinan's choosing about who she calls a friend. So she kind of reveals, again, and this is another trope we mentioned to the Next Generation, these scheming admirals.
Yeah.
Again, there was this thing with the Cardassians in this story. But the main onus is that Ro Laren actually had the right information, but they weren't willing to trust her because of what had happened before.
Yeah.
And that developed a relationship later on between her and Riker that actually had a lot of sexual tension in it, as it turned out.
Yeah, in different episodes.
And so they lost their memory. They were on each other like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, they didn't seem to regret it. So,
yeah.
So it wasn't a rivalry thing. It was just like a tension. Him disliking her chilliness, but him kind of wanting to get with her too. And
right from the beginning, when she steps onto the ship, I mean, there's an instant conflict right there where everybody on the ship doesn't like her because she did something in a previous mission that, tainted her. Sort of like what's going on, with that character in Deep Discovery, what's her name there?
Burnham.
Yeah, same thing, different story. It's like she's a pariah, so everybody stays away from her. And the only one that had the guts to go up and talk to her was Guinan, because
Guinan was in Starfleet. She could just say, well, I'm not biased in this situation. I just see a young woman who's troubled.
Yeah.
And who has something she needs to deal with here.
So that was like the second time where the Enterprise, I mean, it was Barclay and then there was Ro, where the crew just wanted to avoid this person because they didn't measure up.
Except with Ro, there was an actual rationale. She had done something wrong, and they had a rationale for it. Only one thing about Ro, and this kept coming up in Star Trek, I don't know why they had such a big problem with a Bajoran earring. And because horror earrings. But the speculation I have is because it was a religious symbol and,
But they let Worf wear that sash through the whole show.
Which is a cultural symbol of being Klingon. I don't know why they didn't make him take his sash off.
They really tripped over that Bajoran. Afraid to tell him to take it off because you might bat left them in half or something. I mean, was that,
I take that off, you will die by pain stick.
I mean, what
I got the sash, pain stick. Or I got the sash, drop your weapons!
Drop your weapons!
I mean, there might have been a little bit of a fear of Klingons being warriors there. With Ro, they knew that she wouldn't freaking bat left them.
Yeah.
She just might be hostile toward him, but...
So it made it sound like he was just being a nag, the way it looked, where, take off that earring.
Well, I think Riker was just, because I think Riker was just showing his arrogance again, which is and Riker has a lot of good traits. I'm not, as Troy would say, I'm not Riker bashing here. I'm just saying that, there was a side of him that was really haughty sometimes.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
like,
I guess him and Troy had that in common, a little bit, where they both could be that way.
Who?
Him and Troy.
Well, Troy was, he pointed out that Troy can be aristocratic.
Yeah, and he can be arrogant. So
yeah, I don't want to go into that. I don't want to go into that episode because it really doesn't apply here. When Troy lost her empathic ability, she was extremely haughty.
Oh yeah, you couldn't live with her.
And then Riker said, "Well, you act like you have an edge around here, and you lost that edge. So I think there's something aristocratic about the way you deal with your heritage." And I mean, maybe that's why he didn't command it. I'm on this Enterprise, so I'm too good to command some rickety old barge. I'm the Galaxy class starship. I can be a big fish in a small pond here, or a little fish in a big pond.
Yeah,
rather than be a big fish on some old bucket that doesn't really cares about it anymore.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not like they're going to give him that Delta Flyer, that fake Delta Flyer from Voyager or anything. Or like, imagine if they say, well, Riker, we give you your own command, and it's going to be one of those little merchantman freighters.
They rolled out the NX-01, and you hear that song.
Right, like a Price is Right thing. Here's the first command, Riker. Do, 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 do.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I get a 150-year-old ship. Thank you.
Yeah, they don't tell him what he's taking for a ship until he accepts the promotion one way or the other, then they tell him.
So, yeah, but yeah, anyway. So, those episodes I mentioned right there. Oh, I was going to mention another one, but I guess I decided not to because I kind of want to do my own one thing I want to do in the future is do episode overviews. And I want to do a special one on the one I'm not going to mention tonight, but we'll talk about it after. But anyway, the point is there anything else we wanted to mention in this? Because I have an ending point that I want to make.
No, I just want to say that, when you asked me to come up with a list of my own for finding episodes with conflict, I sat and I thought, and I said, you know what? I can't think of one episode there wasn't conflict.
So you had even broader interpretation than I did.
How can you not have conflict when you're writing a story? I mean, what's the point of the reader to read the story?
Well, like I said, if they didn't have conflict, it would just be the crew sitting around on hammocks drinking lemonade all day.
Yeah, I mean, how boring a story can that be? It's like...
I mean, it would be like Landru.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Riker, are you not of the body?
From the very first episode of any Star Trek in history, it was always conflict. That's the way you write a story.
And, but here's my ending point. And we talked about this the other day. I think when a lot of people say that Gene Roddenberry didn't have enough conflict in his shows, what they think they mean is that he didn't have ongoing personal betrayals of people that extended over and created massive distrust.
Yeah, where people didn't like each other.
And where it continued going downhill. And here's the key. There's a big difference between a conflict existing and a conflict being resolved. And if you look at all these stories that I mentioned in Star Trek, TOS, and TNG, what is the key component with a conflict? They're always resolved in some way.
That's right.
Now, of course, the TV series will say, well, they resolved it in an hour. We're seeing an hour. How long do you think these Star Trek The Next Generation episodes actually last in their own timeline?
Here's the other part of that. It's like, well, if it's okay for you to watch a sitcom where a problem is resolved in a half an hour, then why are you complaining about a show that's resolving a problem in an hour?
But again, same applies. I mean, like I said, people talk about the Brady Bunch like that. Well, they solve all their problems in half an hour. Each episode may encompass a week.
Yeah.
In their time. We're just seeing a condensed half-hour version of that time.
Still, it's a really a dumb argument to make. I mean, because...
Yeah, it is, because TV just condenses actual time. Those TNG episodes may take place over many weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes, like, that one about the Aldeans, that episode was definitely more than a week because they pushed them away for a whole week.
That's right.
They didn't do an ongoing where they said, oh, here's the week where they went back to Aldea.
Yeah.
I mean, them playing cards, like, wait to go home.
8 years, but the actual length of time that from the time that we saw it was probably longer than 8 years. It might have been 10 years.
TNG is a series?
Yeah, it's a series. I mean, and Star Trek timeline, it might have been 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't exactly go back to Space Dock every summer and just sit around and lounge.
Yeah. What do they do in the summer? They just sit around and twiddle their thumbs,
Yeah, it's summertime. We got to go back and go to Ryza and have fun and then go back on our mission,
I mean, look, when they're traveling from point A to point B, it takes months to get there. People don't understand. When they go to warp, it's not like they're there instantly. Sometimes it takes days, even weeks to get to their...
So there's a lot of missions in TNG. That mission from Encounter at Farpoint to All Good Things might have been a decade.
That's right.
Although they did say it was 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, they say 7 years, but...
I mean, even in the show they said 7 years, but the point is there's a lot of missions we probably didn't see there.
Yeah. So
yeah,
like I said, it's just a dumb argument some people make to try to make...
I really think... I think it's throwing shade at Roddenberry that he had this utopian idea of the future. That doesn't mean he was anti-conflict.
Yeah.
It just meant that he wanted the conflicts resolved. And, one thing that really disappoints me in today's world is that I've noticed, and I don't know if you've noticed this too, a lot of people, and I'm not going to say it's a very fine people on both sides thing here. I definitely, there are certain types of people with certain viewpoints that do this way more than others. There's this tendency today to want to hold on to someone's pain. If somebody feels like, I don't like the way you behave toward me, I'm going to hold on to that forever and I'm going to destroy you because of it.
Yeah, like
And that's not conflict resolution. That's just basically a vendetta.
Yeah, holding a grudge against somebody
And
else.
I mean, I never like to wax political in these, but when you look what's happening in America today with racism and violent attacks, it all feels like a massive vendetta.
Yeah.
And it's like, when somebody comes in there to resolve a conflict, people will say, you're being ridiculous, you're being stupid, blah, 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 blah. No, you're not. You're being sensible.
Yeah,
the whole point of it,
keep your nose out of it, don't mess with our affairs or something.
Right. And I mean, like I said, if you just have conflict exist for the sake of it and don't resolve it, it will never stop.
That's right.
I mean, that's why there are holy wars fought throughout the world. It might have been, a holy war that happened in a country that killed billions of people might have started over a single grain of rice 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
It might have started over a misinterpretation of a page in the spiritual text.
Yeah.
And in Star Trek, it's always about resolving conflict. Sometimes the point of saying, you're arguing over a piffle. Like in that episode I mentioned about the ensigns of command, the argument itself was way bigger than what they were arguing over.
Yeah.
The guy's like, well, we can't leave this planet because of an aqueduct.
Yeah.
And it's like, you've made the building of that aqueduct your whole thing, but really it's a trifle. And in the end, the guy's like, oh, well, there's other challenge, there's bigger stuff. This is not worth it.
Yeah.
Of course, Data has to destroy the aqueduct to get them to think that. But, I mean, they put all their weight, I'm telling you, if somebody could find a way to fight a war over a pumpkin these days, they'd probably do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous how people elect not to resolve conflicts. And me personally, I consider myself a conflict resolver. And that's one thing I like about Star Trek, and I think it was inspired by me, because I saw conflict in every Star Trek just like you did, except at the end of the day, they weren't all left to the dust. They always resolved them in some way.
Yeah.
Or
and,
at least
another thing that I see in society today is people want resolution to problems overnight. And in a lot of cases, it can't be done that fast.
Right, instant gratification. And Star Trek actually addressed that with another episode I didn't mention because it really didn't apply too much. The Packlets. Remember how they were trying to use Geordi because they didn't want their species, they wanted their species to get instant gratification. They didn't want to wait for their progression.
Yeah.
You could apply that Packlet logic to today, where, well, they're smarter, so, we have to beat them,
Yeah.
I just saw earlier that somebody was going on and on about, well, competitiveness has always driven innovation. If we're not competing, we're not going to innovate. I was like, no, competitive does not always drive innovation. Necessity is what does that.
But you have to put in the time that it takes to do something, to do something, that you want.
Right.
You can't just say tomorrow it's going to happen. You got to put in the work.
Exactly. And again, I see if you're competing with somebody to get something done, you're going to neglect safety standards and somebody could get hurt.
That's right.
So like I'm saying that if your innovations all come from conflict, you're going to have a conflicted innovation. Innovation should come from necessity, not from competition.
Yeah, none of these big companies that we got in America today sprung up overnight. They did it through years and years and years and years of work to become the empires that they are now. And so to ask people to say, well, we need to change society this way and it's got to happen now because it's been the other way too long. Well, okay, that's fine, but you got to actually do the work. You got to put in the work to get that.
Yes, and basically it's like any invention, you have to figure out if there's a need for it and try to put that need in there.
That's right.
And it's not a matter of competing with somebody.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we've seen examples of that where sometimes it does, like the space race itself, that was done by competition. But if you look at all the sacrifices and all the mistakes made in that, you see the competition isn't always the best way to innovate.
That's right.
And it isn't the only way.
Yeah.
Like I said, when humanity figured out they needed a better form of transportation than their own feet, they came up with a wheel. So I don't think Caveman was saying that, well, I've got some little thing that I've got, and I've got a wheel, so mine's better. You go, I don't think it was like that. I think it was just necessity.
It's going to be innovation that gets us to Mars, not by using what we have now. Somebody's going to have to sit down and think, how are we going to do this? And
it's not going to come by saying that, well, say China going there next year, we got to go there a year before them.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. There's a competition thing, and there's a lot of, and I see that the way Star Trek's being done now. Well, or even back when we talked about Section 31. Well, the X-Files are we gotta make Star Trek more like X-Files.
Yeah.
That's trying to innovate through conceptualization, and look what happened there.
Yeah.
And now you get a situation where people are hung up on this weird little adjunct that came out of a screwed up thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's harder in the post-Gene Roddenberry world for Star Trek to deal with conflict resolution because society has sort of moved backward from that.
Yeah.
We made so many, inroads from the 1970s onward toward diplomacy. And that's, like you said, that's one of the things that drove TNG being a more diplomatic-based series.
Yeah.
Then over the years, it kind of went back to that World War II thing where shoot them all and sort it out later. And, there's been this constant war and conflict. And I think Star Trek currently is reflecting that. And I think that it's not so much that Star Trek needs more conflict in it or ever needed more conflict. I think it needed to pump up the idea of conflict resolution.
Yeah, how are we going to solve these
Which
problems?
is what TOS did, which is what the Next Generation did, Gene Roddenberry. And I think that's what Gene Roddenberry's message was. If you talk to Gene, I don't think you'd ever have said, I don't want lack of conflict in the show. I just want conflict resolution.
Well, it would make sense coming from him since he was a police officer. And as a cop, I guess you would want to know, when you see all these people that have problems, you kind of want to know, well, how can I help them or something? Maybe he was the kind of person that would like to help them.
If a cop is a real professional, they're going to want to resolve a conflict, not just keep it going.
Yeah, they don't want to have to keep arresting this person over and over again. They want to help see if there's a way that they can actually change that from happening. And I think he approached, Star Trek in that same way as, I'm going to give them a problem and let's see how we can work this out.
I was talking to my friend Henrique about, aside from police brutality, how cops have just become, so bitter now. In those days, cops felt that, they had an important thing to do. And even though there were unjust laws, a lot of cops actually felt they were trying to enforce some good law. But nowadays, a lot of cops, even ones that aren't corrupt, are overworked, underpaid. And, he even said, we're not in the day anymore where the cop might, say hi to the old lady they're trying to protect across the street. They might just be like, leave me alone. I got a hard job. I got to go home to my wife, blah, 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 blah. And like I said, again, and those kind of cops are going to be more bitter and more angry.
Yeah.
Because they're not loving what they're doing. They're not trying to do this for justice. They're trying to do this because they just want to get things done quickly. Like you said, they just want to get something handled quickly. Well, I see a problem. I presume what it is, I'm just going to, beat them all up and that's going to be it. And that's probably behind police brutality too. So everything is kind of about, let's get it done quickly so we don't have to deal with it, And conflict resolution takes time and effort, a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And, the need to escape and the need not to think about what you're doing. And that's the weird thing. The internet actually provides a very good, ground for conflict resolution.
Yeah, because it brings us together. But instead, we're fighting and we're not listening.
Exactly. People go online and they're bringing all this instant gratification onto the internet.
Yeah.
So what happens is you have these internet haters who come out there and say, well, the internet is causing all these. No, people are just using it wrongly.
Yeah. Nobody wants to listen. They just want to keep barking at each other and getting rid of their feelings. Right.
But again, it's people. It's not the medium, it's the people.
Yeah.
And they're bringing their crap into the medium. Somebody created it and they're bringing their crap into it. So like I said, somebody needs to come in, I know I do this and say, hey, you know what? We've got this medium there that's connecting the world. Let's deal with this like human beings.
I see people, and there's not many, but once in a while, I'll see people that try to have a discussion in a fair and a balanced way. But there's always going to be one in discussion that's going to start with the insults, and then all of a sudden the thread will degrade.
Right, exactly.
And so
like I said, it'll become all about the troll and the drama or whatever's being created.
So that's where it gets lost. People make the attempt, but it gets, when you have all these different people involved.
And then you need to that person, can we roll this back about 7 comments back where it actually made some sense here? Because, and that doesn't mean necessarily that making a good point means you're going to agree with every side.
Yeah.
You may have a distinct side, but it's more the eloquence with how you discuss it rather than saying that you're a fool and whatever colorful metaphor you want to use because I don't like you and I'm going to call you petty names and use petty memes and snide remarks. It's like, no, we can disagree on something, but we can talk about the issue, not hurl pot shots.
I would love to be able to sit across from somebody about the gun issue and have a conversation with somebody like from the NRA or somebody like that, and just have it without having this thing devolve.
And like you said, you know, and they're into get petty, unfortunately.
I know, but there's got to be somebody out there who would be willing to just listen, and just weigh each argument and see if there's a middle ground that you guys can agree on that you can build on or something, where you can find reason somewhere.
I'm not going to get too political on that, but you would think that the sensible gun law thing would be a great middle ground, but no.
It can't be for everybody. Not everybody could do that.
Just to bring in a piece of the news that is relevant to this conflict resolution thing, New Zealand is already doing that.
Yeah, I see that. I mean,
That's
how quickly?
gun laws. So basically, here's my thing: is that hey, we're gonna be the last country out in the end of the day.
Yeah.
You're gonna see every country in the world institute this. And when I saw that, I said, "Oh, I wish we had a Picard here. You know?
Yeah.
Please, come in here and have that meeting with the ready room with all these people. I mean, I would love to see Patrick Stewart just do that as a goof, like have him and the Enterprise D and have all these NRA people here and have them all get Picard.
Yeah.
Like him saying that, well, here's something that'll work for everybody, and
Yeah.
I would love to see them get a Picard speech, like, how are we gonna get out of this guy?
Yeah. There's got to be a middle ground there.
But like I said, you can't fight the future. Things are going to happen.
Like I said, it takes work, though. It takes work. And eventually, if people come to the table and they're willing to not let the thing devolve into mudslinging, enough work can come out of that where somebody could get to an answer there.
Thank you. And my point about that, it goes right with yours, is that as it existed during Gene Roddenberry's lifetime, we talked about conflict resolution with all these stories we mentioned here.
Yeah.
That's a great model for how to deal with things now, because those things took work, they took time.
Yeah.
And they took effort among people. And, nothing's going to come unless, and a lot of people, unfortunately, nowadays, they put a lot of efforts into little stupid things that don't matter at all.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really want to resolve the gun issue because it's kind of complicated. But, oh, my goodness, I got one spot on the rug. I got to go out and find $1,000 to dry clean that yesterday. People just making these little tiny, who even cares about them problems into the end of the world.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if I were you, I'd be more concerned about gun violence and your stupid little rug.
Yeah.
But honestly, because people do this. And I notice in the Star Trek time, they tend to prioritize things in a very good way.
Yeah.
Which I think is also a help. So I think it's
silent as a whisper. I mean, at the end.
Yes, Riva.
Yeah, Riva. I mean, the way he could bring these people together is they had to learn how to do sign language, how to to talk to Riva, and by doing so, they were working together to be able to talk to Riva.
Right. What was the phrase? Turning a disadvantage into an advantage.
That's right.
Like they said, Riva didn't have his course. He felt vulnerable and like he lost an advantage, and he decided, well, if I teach them my sign language, they'll learn through talking to me how to talk to each other, like you said.
Yeah.
Because they'll really just have each other and him to deal with. So it'll,
But they left, where the conflict wasn't resolved yet, but they knew it was going to take time. So that's why they ended it the way they did, where he was left standing waiting for the people to.
And you can almost presume it probably worked. I mean, it just would take time to work.
It took years, but maybe finally got it to where they were peaceful again or something. Who knows?
But here's the thing about this is a little message to Star Trek fans out there, because I follow a lot of you on Facebook and on Twitter, and I'm surprised that among Star Trek fans, they're sometimes on the higher end of this whole, enacting a personalized draconian law on everybody, like you said, going around and, going down in these comment threads that have nothing to do with what the original argument was.
Yeah.
Especially about this whole discovery thing. That's been a major powder keg of this.
Oh, yeah.
Where instead of talking about what you like or dislike about it, it all then becomes, well, I don't like you just because of some stupid thing you said that I don't like.
Yeah.
You made this mistake, and I'm going to not let you forget it. I'm going to keep reminding you, and it's like, and here's my thing. If people don't know there's a solution to that, it's right in the Star Trek you love. Go back and watch any one of these episodes I mentioned, then go back into your internet forums and talk about Discovery with that in your mind.
Yeah. So
we can have some sensible conversations about that. Anything in Star Trek today you please. It's all right in the show. There was actually a book written by a guy called Make It So. It was actually using Picard quotes and situations for people in business situations.
Yeah.
And I found that interesting because it wasn't really a Star Trek book. It was using the 24th century idea of conflict resolution to deal with business people and business negotiations.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of thing would actually apply very well today. Like, let's take Picard and apply him to today's internet world.
Yeah.
How would he handle it, or how would Janeway handle it, or how would Kirk handle it, whatever.
Yeah.
Or how would the Star Trek universe handle it in general. So I think that's a very important thing to be able to do, is that conflict resolution. And I think that, again, if any of you have trouble with somebody online about a thing in Star Trek that you can't resolve the conflict, again, go back to any of these episodes, and your answers are going to be in there if you look for it. It's part of what it is. So no, Star Trek has never been anti-human conflict. It just is about resolving those conflicts in some kind of way.
The way people today look at conflict is not the way.
Right. It's black and white. It's like everybody's going to be totally hating and distrustful of each other, and that's
not a boxing match every episode.
And that's actually, and I guess I'm going to put it another way. And you made a point. I think what a lot of people do today is mistake cynicism for conflict.
Yeah.
And they're not the same thing. A hopeful person can have a conflict with somebody, but it'll be an argument with the intention to work something out.
Yeah.
If a person is cynical and they've lost all their hope, the argument's already over before it even started. What's the point?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to have an argument and look at it as an end to a friendship or something like that, then, that's, like you said, that's like taking an extreme stand on something, like if somebody doesn't agree with you on every single thing, that doesn't mean you can't be friends with that person, because you might have something in common or several things in common. You don't have to agree with everything. But today it seems like if you don't agree with somebody on every point that they stand on, they don't want to know. They don't want to know you. They don't want to have anything to do with you. And that's the kind of conflict that they're looking for in today's shows, is if they have to be equal on every single, thing, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Or even worse, the characters have to totally hate each other.
Yeah, and the friendship's still there. I mean, how many times did Kirk and Bones and Spock have disagreements on things? But they went through their years and they still were the big three, the triad. You said, their friendship won out over all those things. So that's the thing I don't think people really understand today, is they don't see that a person that's a friend to somebody shouldn't have any conflict at all. Humans.
Well, like I said, it's not so much that. I see a lack of conflict today. I just see more people, it's either total love or total hate.
That's right.
And, and mostly on the hate side of it. Mostly they either have to be at odds with each other, or it's like, well, I'm going to totally back them in every issue.
Yeah.
And it's, and like I said, it ends up being more complicated than just resolving conflicts.
You're going to live a lonely life if you live the way people want to live today, because you're never going to like anybody, because there's no two people on this earth that will agree on every single thing, not two. Even if you're in the same religion, there's still going to be disagreement on something about your religion. I mean, I've learned that, everybody's got a different take on what they believe in or what they see,
Right.
It's just...
and like I said, that's the thing we have with Star Trek nowadays. The fans are very divided amongst themselves.
Yeah.
And, with the conservative Star Trek fans, they're convinced that their way is kind of the only way.
Yeah.
And so when more liberal Star Trek fan comes in and says, well, we can kind of resolve conflicts and agree to disagree on certain things, they want their point to be right. So, so I'm not saying it doesn't come from just, because, I'm not one of these people personally who says that, well, everybody's always at fault either, because that would be the same argument that, well, everybody participated in this. Sometimes there is a single source for this.
Yeah.
But it's like, again, conflict resolution is the key, and it's in Star Trek, and it's there if you want to see it. So that's just my finishing point.
And maybe they ought to teach kids in school how to resolve issues of conflict without fighting. Like fist fights.
Yeah, you would think after 70, 100 years of that would happen, but it keeps coming back around to that.
Yeah, it's a good lesson to learn when you're growing up, how to do that,
So anyway, if you haven't got any points, I'm pretty much done. Next week it's your turn, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So, like I said, message to Star Trek fans: enjoy your Star Trek, and if you have a little conflict online, pay a little more attention to those Picard speeches in his ready room. You might find your solution there. Anyway, live long and prosper, everybody, and infinite diversity and infinite combinations. See you next week.